Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Charterstone Digital Edition. In this video we will show you the gameplay of the first game of the campaign, as well as explain to you all the basic mechanics you need to know to play the game. We will be playing as the blue charter alongside red, yellow and purple. You can play this game with up to 6 players, but for the purposes of this video, 4 will suffice. First thing that every charter needs to do is to construct their basic resource building. Every charter has one, and they are unique to their own respective charters. Then we get to name our charter. This is most important. At the beginning of every game, the first player is randomly determined by a dice roll. Then the turn order goes clockwise. In this case, the first player is yellow, so I will be next, then red, then purple. Charterstone is a worker placement game, meaning that every turn we will pick one of our workers and place them somewhere on the map, where they will perform an action on a building. In this case, I sent my worker to my basic resource building, which awarded me 1 metal. I could have, however, sent it to any building on a map, assuming I could afford the cost. Notice that whenever you pick one of your workers, the game will highlight all the buildings that you can afford to send your worker to. Now let's notice what happened here. The blue player sent their worker to the building already occupied by the purple player's worker. What happens then is that the worker already standing on the building gets bumped and returned into their owner's hand. You can do that with your own workers. Now let's take a look at what the red player did during their turn. They sent their worker to the cloud port to perform quota action. Quota action is a one-off trade of one of your resources, coins or other commodities for benefit in form of victory points or possibly increasing your reputation, about which we will talk a bit later. Throughout the game, players will acquire cards of different types, all of which can be seen here. We always start with a crate that can be opened using the Charterstone building. So I will send my worker there to perform an action, pay the costs and gain the benefits. This is the way all of the buildings in the game work, except for the basic resource buildings that do not have a cost. Crates can contain new buildings that you can construct, new rules or game components. In this case, I have unlocked 2 new buildings as well as personas, a completely new component to the game with its own set of rules. Personas do not come into play immediately when unlocked, because they have to be chosen at the start of the game, so they will start being relevant at the start of the second game, but all of the components that I have unlocked right now are added to my personal supply. Whenever a player opens the crate, all other players can see what they have unlocked. Charterstone does not really have any hidden information. So in this case, the yellow player opened the crate and we can see what they have unlocked. And just as well, by using the appropriate buttons in the top panel, we can always see which personas and other cards all of the players have at any given time. Now that we have unlocked 2 buildings, it's a good moment to think about constructing them. In order to do so, we have to use the Zeppelin building and pay the cost. Part of the cost of any building is printed on the card itself. In this case, you can see 4 resources that we have to pay, amongst other things. The rest of the cost is shown on the Zeppelin building. Let's talk about costs and benefits. The purple player has used the treasury. Its cost is any basic resource, its benefit is 1 coin, which means that by performing an action on this building, you can trade one of your basic resources for 1 coin. Simple as that. Now we can see that the red player has opened the crate, and again, just with the yellow one, all of the players can see what they have unlocked. If you ever need a refresher on the information we're talking about here, Charterstone has its own tutorial as well as very well developed rulebook that you can always access from the game. In almost every window in the game, there will be a question mark button that will lead you to an appropriate section in the rulebook. This time it's the purple player who has opened the crate, and again we can see what they have unlocked. Now let's look at the side panel, where at every given point we can see how many resources, how many coins, how many available workers, how much influence, about that later, and how many points each player has at this particular moment in time. And now that I have all the required resources to construct one of my buildings, let's do just that. Now let's take a closer look at the costs and benefits in case of the more complicated building than the previous one. Zeppelin, which is the building that you will use to construct other buildings, will require you, as its cost, to have, of course, a building card, because you will use it to construct the building, the cost on the card that we have discussed previously, the 4 resources that you need to have, as well as free influence. Influence is a finite resource that you will always start the game with 12 of, and you will spend it on various complicated and intensive tasks. There are ways to regain your influence during a game, but in general this is a precious resource. You can also see here the possible bonus benefit, in this case the ability to raise your reputation. About this we'll talk later. Those bonus benefits do not come from the building itself, but from outside sources, like cards that you may possess. So be on the lookout for that. So now that we have sent our worker to the Zeppelin building, we've paid the cost, we pick the building that we want to construct, pick the spot for it in our charter, you can never build outside of your charter, and we place it, and that's it. And now, as mentioned before, we also have an opportunity to raise our reputation. Reputation is a mechanic that will award players victory points at the end of the game. You have to have at least 1 reputation to get any points. The player with the most reputation will get 10 points, the second best will get 7, the third will get 5. If there is a tie, both players will get the same amount of points, so if both players have 2, both will get 10 points. Reputation also has limited amount of slots shared amongst all players, so if altogether between everybody 13 reputation has been achieved, nobody can gain any more reputation during that game. Note that increasing your reputation, as well as some other actions in the game, cause permanent loss of influence. Permanent loss of influence works like any regular cost would. However, there are ways in Charterstone to regain the influence you have spent during this game. If an action, however, causes permanent loss of influence, during this game you will not be able to regain the spent influence. The next game, however, you will have regained all the influence you have spent, permanently or not. So, in other words, the permanent loss of influence only affects you this specific game. There are other actions that cause permanent loss of influence, like performing a quota action or scoring objectives. Speaking of, let's talk about another thing accessible from the top panel, which is Objectives mat. Objectives mat has 3 objectives available to all the players during this game. Every player can score each of these objectives, and each of these objectives can be only scored once by each player. However, there's nothing stopping all 3 players from scoring all 3 objectives. Objectives are being scored by performing an action on a grandstand building in the middle of the village, which we will visit later on. Grandstand, just like Charterstone, Zeppelin building, Treasury, all of which we have already seen or discussed, and the marketplace that we will get to in a moment, are in the middle of the map in an area called Commons. Commons are accessible to all the players and can never be built over or changed. Those will remain with us until the end of the campaign. So the last building in the Commons area is the Marketplace, where for the cost of 1 resource of our choice and 1 coin, we can gain 1 card from the Advancement mat. Advancement mat can be also accessed from the top panel, where we can see which cards are available at this point. So just as well, we will send our worker there, we will pay 1 coin and 1 steel, because that's what we have, and gain 1 of the assistants. Assistants are cards that give us passive benefits that trigger whenever, well, the trigger happens. In this case, the Longshoreman will allow me to increase my reputation whenever I use Grandstand, so whenever I score an objective. Assistants are effectively passive abilities that we can benefit from as long as we have them in our personal supply. Okay, so now we will have a couple of minutes of things that we've already seen, so either sit back, relax and enjoy the calm music, or skip to around 12-minute mark for another piece of information. At this point I decide to open another crate. Crates may come from different sources. You can get them from the advancement mat, but also constructing most buildings will reward you with another crate. So the more you build, the more you can open, the more you can build, etc, etc. Now this is exciting. With our second crate we unlock Minions, another set of game components and new rules to add to the game. In addition, we gain another building card, another persona, and a new objective. This one, instead of being added to our personal supply, goes straight into the objectives deck and from now on can be drawn and a part of general objectives. In addition, for unlocking the minions, we gain one of the minions of the type that we have unlocked. Every charter will unlock their own type of minion, and every time a person unlocks them, they will gain one of them. Now here just a reminder that at any point if you lose track of who has what, which is entirely feasible, you can check other players' personal supplies and their personas, both active and inactive. Now that it's our turn again, we can see our minion. Minions are effectively a kind of a worker, however one that has specific limitations but also specific abilities. Minions can only be placed on the buildings in their owner's charter. Minions cannot be placed on the buildings with other workers already on them, and minions will not be bumped when somebody else has placed their worker on the building with a minion already on it. You can place your workers on a building with your minion, but not the other way around. Because of that, in here I cannot place my minion and I have to retrieve all my workers. As mentioned before, all minions have abilities. Minions' abilities get triggered in two situations, either when you place your minion on a building, or when somebody places their worker on a building with your minion already on it. Then, instead of being bumped, because as we said, minions cannot be bumped, the minion's ability will trigger. My minion is a robot, meaning that whenever its ability is being triggered, I get to pick one of the cards from the advancement deck and keep it. Minions' abilities will always trigger before the action on the building triggers. This is important because sometimes your minion's ability will allow you to use the building that you otherwise wouldn't afford. Here we can see that a small red badge appeared next to the Objectives Mat symbol at the top panel. It is there to indicate that somebody can afford to score an objective. There we can also see who has already scored any objectives and how far we are from meeting the requirements to scoring any. Every campaign game of Charterstone comes with a guidepost. There are two parts to guideposts. One is an additional objective that is not required to win the game, but will alter the result of the campaign. The first one doesn't have any, so it just win the game. The other one is a temporary rule that will alter one of the core mechanics of Charterstone as you know them. In the case of the first game, it's breaking the capacity rule, meaning that you can advance to the next game with all the things you have in your personal supply, a thing you will not be able to do from the second game forward. Here you can see that in the last turn we have built another building in our charter. This one, for the cost of 2 coins, grants a benefit of 1 victory point and 1 robot. Bear in mind and do remember that any player can visit any player's charter and buildings are in no way limited. Therefore, other players, just as purple player has, can visit our building and gain robots. Therefore, do not think of minions as charter specific even though they have to be unlocked via crates of specific charters. Any player can use them. Now let's talk about how long even is one game of Charterstone. Well, the game ends once the progress track reaches the end. You can see it here. The progress track advances when players perform actions on buildings with blue torch symbol on them, such as Zeppelin, Charterstone, Grandstand, etc. As well as, like the red player here, begin their turn with no influence left. In this case, the progress track advances automatically. The player who advances the progress token into or over the field with the reputation symbol on it, so the blue boat, gets the opportunity to increase their reputation. And that's it, the first campaign game is over. The red player has won with 35 points, I was second with 32, then yellow with 31 and purple with 25. For every 10 points player scores during the game, they receive 1 glory point, so red, blue and yellow received 3 glory points, while purple only 2. After that, each player assigns their glory to their chosen category. Once the category is full, they receive the chosen benefit at the beginning of each subsequent game. The campaign has 12 games, so there's still 11 to go. And lastly, capacity. In each game after the first one, players will have to choose which minions, resources, cards, etc. they will get to take with them to the next game. One more thing, let's discuss the campaign scoring. At any given point, you can click the crown button at the top panel to see the campaign scoring tab. There we can see that players earn campaign points for glory, capacity, buildings constructed in their charters, personas they have used, and victories they have acquired. As you can see, some values are to from, for example, capacity will award you from 1 to 3 points per capacity. This is deliberate at this point of the campaign and will be addressed later on. And that's it! For more questions or to interact with our awesome community, join our Facebook group, Charterstone Digital Edition Official. You can also find us at Twitter and on Instagram, and yeah, stay tuned, take care.